Hello and welcome to the Men's Movement Podcast. I am your host, Vince Casey. This is a podcast where we explore the rising culture in men's healing and interview top thought leaders about the positive shift occurring in the masculine consciousness. The Men's Movement Podcast is in partnership with the Brotherhood of Cascadia. Brotherhood of Cascadia, connecting men to their hearts. I am very pleased to welcome my brother Bryce Gill. He is a facilitator with Sacred Sons, a vocal activation coach, a relating coach, and a keeper of the sacred silly. Bryce, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. So good to see you, bro.
Yeah, I feel like it's been 5 days since I've seen you.
It feels that way. It feels that way.
Yeah, it was so nice seeing you and Tiffany at the Hawthorne ceremony, and I love seeing you guys. You always give me the squishiest hugs that I've ever gotten in my life. So,
Yeah, brother.
yeah. Speaking of Tiff, I saw that you and her were added to the leadership team at Convergence 9.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. It's going to be a special time. It's going to be unprecedented times is a phrase that's thrown out a lot, but this will be that with Convergence 9 being brought together, men and women together, and she and I will be holding the sanctuary space, which is a place for refuge from the oppressive forces. So it is a place for permission to relax, repose, play silly games, squish on some soft stuff, have some cacao or some tea, and it's gonna be really fun to be able to share that world with her and her with that world, and other brothers be there as well. It's gonna be a rich space.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what y'all bring to the table. I know you're a power couple in the healing community, and when I heard that, it definitely brought a smile to my face. So I'm super excited to see y'all there. And I'm also excited to have you on today. We've been in circle several times together now, and I always walk away from our time together with new insights and inspiration. So I'm excited to have a chance to chat with you.
Most definitely, bro. Me too. Always great to talk with you.
Yeah, I'd like to start with one of your offerings as a cacao ceremonialist, otherwise known as the Cacao Boy, you and Jamie.
Oh, yeah.
Still needs to be made a song by someone, probably Bjorn.
Probably.
Yeah. So I let my hippie card kind of expire a while back. I'm not sure when that was, but I wasn't really aware of what a cacao ceremony was the first time we partook in Washington. And, I was just kind of like, oh, goody, organic hot chocolate time. But however, a lot of folks, this is one of the most sacred rituals and one of the highlights of the gathering for them. Can you take us a little bit deeper into the roots of the ceremony and what drew you into leading the cacao ritual?
Yeah, man. Yeah, you naming that you didn't quite know what it was going into it. That's how it feels for me every time, which is part of the delight for me. It feels there are certainly lineages that exist, especially through the Mayan tradition. There's a lot of in Guatemala, and there's a lot of Mayan blood still coursing, and so there's connection to some of the traditional ways, and there is a lot of interrupt in tradition from other Aztecs and Incas and other peoples that walked this land and lived with cacao. And so there's a lot of disruption in those lineages. So in that, there's as a light-skinned person from North America, I feel permissed to let the medicine be the guide. Mother Spirit, Mama Cacao, is deeply instructive if one is willing to listen to where she wants to take us. So yes, it's a very subtle plant medicine, and she really is my lead plant ally. So it is not psychoactive. It isn't you may walk away with some deep new understandings about how your life is going and what you want to shape it into, but it isn't psychoactive in that way. So it is, as far as the ritual itself or the ceremony, it's and part of why it works so well in men's spaces where connection is really the desired aim or the aim for kind of what is wanting to happen. It's a deeply connective medicine it's a heart opener, and it moves the waters, moves the blood, and lifts the spirits. And so it is that as kind of a base foundation for connecting with the mother, connecting with each other, connecting with heart and self, and allowing spirit to move through, allowing openness to be the theme and the feel in the space, and allowing more and more communication and connection through words, a little bit of song in the space, and connecting to that which has given without any desire for reciprocity or any thought of reciprocity, that sort of like unconditional love that is represented so well by mothers, is in the air, so to speak. And so my excuse me, my appointment as a steward of Mama Cacao is to usher that energy into the space, and remind men of it, and people. Tiff and I use it in combination with conversations around death. We do these cacao and death salons, and so it's using cacao to open the heart, open the willingness, share from the heart, and drop into the body, all in combination. And then we're wide open and possibly a little bit tearful as we open up a conversation of how death is showing up and how people are preparing for death and what death looks like, and death of any kind, death of a job, death of a pet, death of a relationship, or death of a loved one, and so on. So cacao is an opener of many things, many portals, many doors, many hearts, many minds. And the ritual is daily for me, sometimes not on the weekends, but it's an opportunity to slow down and listen, and that is multi applicable and flexible as a base teaching from cacao. And so what the ritual and ceremony ends up looking like in a different group is dependent on the group and the time and the day, and so it's all very emergent in that way. And it is love is at the core. Love is at the core, and so it's normalizing the love to come from the core and spill out into the space is how I kind of hold cacao. It's kind of a long, meandering answer to your question, I think.
Yeah, those are the best kind.
There
That's
might be one
that's what
of
I'm
those.
looking for. So no, yeah, you're kind of the cacao dealer in our little community. Every time I see you, I'm like, hey, can
Yeah.
I get some of that stuff? And where do you normally source your cacao from?
Give me some of that chunky brown.
Yeah.
I am blessed enough to know Juan Carlos Venueza, who is from Ecuador, and he is in deep connection with Pacari Chocolate is the company, and they are the first company in Ecuador to create chocolate from tree to bar, as they say. So they're the first company to source the beans and also make chocolate in Ecuador, as opposed to just harvesting the beans and sending it. So the cacao that I steward and carry is Arriba Nacional Fino de Aroma, which is Arriba Nacional. Nacional is the varietal. Arriba Nacional is a sub varietal. It's kind of an heirloom varietal of the Nacional bean. And then Fino de Aroma speaks to the fermentation process that is very patient and slow and involves buckets with holes in the bottom and lots of smiling, loving attention. And then, it's harvested twice a year instead of 5 times a year, like a lot of the hybrids are. You only get about a fifth, or I guess maybe like quarter to third of the harvest from those trees as well. So it's I conclude from that higher potency and more ancient medicine because it hasn't been hybridized for mass production. So it is from all over Ecuador. Pacar is in conversation with farms all over Ecuador, and then they create these things called finca de cacao, which is like a hub. Many farms bring their beans to the finca, and then the finca distributes it to Pacari, and then they make paste and chocolate and various things.
Mm. Well, that is getting my taste buds going. We'll have to give our listeners a way to reach out to you towards the end of the show so we can tap into that resource if we want to.
Yeah, most definitely.
Well, I jokingly referred to you as the keeper of the sacred silly in your introduction because you are, in fact, a very funny comedian. And because when you're facilitating, you advise men not to escape a moment of healing through humor. A lot of men will use comedy as a way to escape an intense moment. And at the same time, you say that laughter is medicine. And the sacred silly certainly has a place at these events. So, where do you draw the line with humor at the events at Sacred Sons? And is it just like strictly your discernment, or do you have a barometer? Where does that come from?
What a great question. And a continuous pursuit of this. It's a sense, isn't it? This sense of humor, right? So there is a discernment, certainly, and there are many uses for humor. There can be, there's a great book called The Science of Laughter, and it describes in this book that when laughing or when really having a humorous experience, both lobes of the brain are lit, and so it actually makes the mind more nimble for greater computation and more complex information to be digested. So you have simply a more active brain when laughing is happening. So that is part of how it can be used in a container. And as far as like when and how, for me it is a continuous meditation that has been up for me a lot lately, which is whether I'm focused on the container or whether I'm focused on myself. Like what is best for the container and what is it for me or is it for the container, is essentially what it boils down to. So if we are in a space, something really intense is happening, there's a lot of pressure building around someone's share, or something big is wanting to move through, and the container is getting kind of pressurized. That pressure can be really useful for moving something through. And if someone were to crack that pressure, crack up, right? Then that pressure is released. And sometimes that's perfect, right? If it feels like it's run its course and we're sort of like, okay, maybe there's an opportunity for something humorous to happen. And I may, crack a little joke to quite literally crack that pressure open. And so then we can all, laugh, put our head back and open our hearts, open our bodies with a good laugh and breathe. Lots of air is moving in through the body with laughter. So it can be a great release. However, if it is through discomfort or inappropriately timed, then that pressure is released, and then the thing that was wanting to happen might not be able to come through fruition and actually be fully realized because the pressure was alleviated too earlier at the wrong moment. And or like if I'm a participant or if I'm feeling nervous in the space and I, out of my discomfort, crack a joke because I don't know how to be quiet and edit while being in a space that is unusual for me, then I might crack a joke to relieve the pressure for myself and then possibly create a little distance between me and everyone else, because maybe I'm using humor to make fun of someone or make light in a way, or like make fun of, it's such a funny term, but ridicule in a way what's happening, and therefore it may be recognizable as a joke and others may laugh, but then someone may feel like, I'm being ridiculed about this vulnerability and this tenderness I was just sharing. Let me go ahead and go back into my cave and not come out again because I'm not doing that shit again. Right. And so then it can be really unfortunate if humor is used in that way. So discernment, yes, and sensing it with my mechanism, my whole body, to tell if it is a nutritious moment for humor, or if I'm cracking the pressure unnecessarily and making it about my own level of comfort, then I may be in different territory.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was a little surprised that humor was so present at some of these events because there's so much serious topics being thrown around. But I really enjoyed when Bjorn did his storytelling event for us, and we all kind of added in each, like, basically he took a piece of a story and started it and then would hand it to the next man, and it kept getting sillier and sillier. And that was a really great moment with you guys, and I hope we get to dig more into what kind of medicine he's bringing for us.
Definitely. And per that, it's like sometimes it is so necessary to round out the picture of what's happening, right? It can
Mhm.
be really compelling as we explore the hero's journey and the fucking intensity of men's work and having testosterone and violence and suicide and addiction and all these. Oh, it's like, yes, it is so intense. And it's like, and also we can have a silly, silly, goofy time with all of it, because how else are we going to balance the load of the heaviness without it adding a little buoyancy to lift off the shoulders?
Yeah, it seems like so many men are hyper focused on the hero archetype, but there's so many other different types of archetypes, and you're kind of known as a magician in our circle, which is an archetype from the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, a book by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. Gillette, the best a man can get.
The best a man can get, right there.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even see that
Right
until I read
there.
it. Okay. Do you identify with the magician archetype?
Hmm. I do. I do. I appreciate that question and offering that frame. It's something that I've taken ownership of more and more later in my life, and understanding more and more what that means. And I think that part of what is important about the archetypes is understanding that there's a light and a dark to all of them. And of course, there's a light and a dark to a magician. There's, as anyone who's devoted to Harry Potter will understand, the studying of the dark arts is a very important one, as well as any of the ability to bring light into a dark space and so on and so forth. So there, there's lots of different kinds of magic and sorcery that is, for someone who has taken an earth body, it is important for me to remember and see and witness more than remember. It's really an active practice of noticing magic as much as it is any kind of generation of magic. So, um, getting in a warm embrace with someone and holding a nice hug for a long time and realizing that I suddenly feel different than I did before we started hugging, and I feel what we can explain with science as oxytocin dropping from my brain, giving me a little like warm feeling in my heart and in my body. That to me is magic, because there is something divinely placed in our mechanism that feels, for lack of any other better way to describe it other than good, it feels good to hold someone's body with my body, which is also is a very vulnerable place, because I could very easily attack you or get the better of you or stab you or kill you because we are standing close to each other and I have all kinds of advantage on your vitals. But something through surrendering to that potential danger, as well as opening the front of our body, which used to be aimed more toward the ground, and our back as our protector, right? So our vitals are all exposed and we're smushing our vitals together. And something in that design makes for a good feeling inside of our hearts and bodies. And so that to me is magic. And that's the practice of fostering and allowing for magic, is seeing it in the natural world, seeing the incredible design of a seashell, or how a tree falls in the forest in Oregon, and it becomes a buffet for a million other things, and you have this long straight line of trees coming up, because life is death, is life is death, is life is death, and so all of it is divinely circling and circulating, circling, and then that illuminates the magic of the circles and cycles of the four seasons, or of our own life cycle, or whatever the case may be. And that's an example of liberation that is available through the recognition and devoted noticing of what I call magic, and a lot of people can call a lot of things. Religions call it different things. People call it, scientists, it's kind of between the known and the unknown, or the provable and the unprovable. And it's like, yeah, well, especially the unprovable is magical, but also a lot of the proven stuff is magic. And the fact that we have brain capacity to witness, track, and quote prove something is also magic. So deep identification as a magician, and also it's like so many things when I land on it, is all of us are capable of our own ability to foster our magical skills and awarenesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Your magic is definitely kind of subtle, Like I wouldn't say I've ever seen you pull a rabbit out of a hat before. But where it shows
Yet.
up for me,
Not yet.
not yet. It's a challenge, by the way. Um,
Received.
where it shows up for me is I can just be like in a different headspace or a dark headspace, and your presence like comes into the room, and I'm just immediately like, "Oh, Bryce is here," and I'm just like kind of jump into a more childlike, more playful state, and I just kind of all that other stuff just melts away. So it's always great to have you in circle and your presence, and it just really feels heart led. If I could put it into one word, I feel like that's why we are all doing the work. We want to stop letting the shadow dominate the conversation, and we want to be heart led, and we want to bring light into the world everywhere we go. For some reason, it's a really hard. For me personally, it's been very hard to get to that place. Like that seems like the hard work, but it also seems hard to be living in the shadows and not be heart led as well. So we might as well kind of grit our teeth and grunt through some of the hard work to get into that heart space. It reminds me a little bit of a story whenever you led the first immersion here in Eugene. I was on Wolfpack for the first time, which is the support group for those of you that don't know, and had a pretty eye-opening experience with the group because it was the first time I wasn't doing the work, so I wasn't getting the results of the work, and so I was very in my head. I was still kind of in a caretaker mode where I was making sure like everybody was having a good event and they were having a good time. And at one point, we broke for lunch, and there was one health food restaurant within like a mile of this place. So of course, being the healthy brothers that we are, everybody just like goes straight to this place to get their salads and their veggies and whatnot. And it took about, well, this place was not ready for us at all. I would say it took about an hour longer than what we were expecting for lunch. And I went to a Mexican food place because I foresaw that shit. But this
My
isn't
man.
this isn't about my ego. So, uh, anywhoosies, I was kind of writing a story in my head that men were perturbed, men were agitated, men wanted their money back, and like all this stuff was going on just in my head, mind you. And I was kind of freaking out a little bit. And what I noticed is whenever you and Riverstone came back from lunch, just like how elated you were to be back in the room, how excited you were to see the men, and how excited you were to jump back into the work. And I really kind of had an aha moment that these men were here for love. We're here to connect, and we're not looking for, or they weren't looking for this well-oiled machine that was perfectly placed with precision. That was kind of all in my head, and it really relaxed me and allowed me to be present and try to be in that heart space with you. And it was inspiring for sure. So it's always interesting where we find medicine, isn't it?
Yeah, most definitely. And it's such a great story. It's such a good example of what is happening as opposed to what I planned, right? It's always that dance of it's very important to have a plan, and it's maybe as important to be flexible with that plan. And so we were, not to say that I wasn't ever concerned about the fact that we were so late coming back from that lunch, and so this for me is a meditation in upset, right? And expectations. Because I had a plan. It was to be back on time from lunch. And the fact that this was going incredibly slowly at this restaurant, I was like, what is going on here? And so then, as opposed to being upset and putting my burden onto the people running the restaurant, it was like, okay, let me just kind of get a feel for what's happening. So what ended up, I asked the guy who was waiting on us. I was like, hey man, are we, what's the story? Kind of find out that two of the three people who were supposed to work that day didn't show up. So I think he's the owner, and he was taking orders and then going back and cooking them and then coming out and bringing them to people. And I was like, oh man, we are okay. That's what we're up to here. So like this like noble, humble man of the people who was willing to receive my request, make me fresh food, and then clean my dishes afterward is being burdened by the circumstances of his situation. And so that is out of my control. So I could get upset about it. because that to me is a wisdom that came from Tiffany, my partner. It's the very nature of things that are upsetting is the fact that they're out of our control or out of our command. It's like that over there. God, if only that person would be doing this, then I would have my peace because they would be doing it the way I understand it. But they're not, and so I'm just going to sit here and be upset about it. So there was accepting that that was happening, and then also looking to our schedule and being like, okay, what do we do with this information? As Kevin Walton would say, with this new awareness, what do I choose? Right. So this is changing. This is not as expected. So and then we got our food as soon as possible because going without lunch was not a viable or felt to me like a smart option for me because I wanted to be fed. And so getting back to the place, then it was like, okay, acknowledgement. This has happened. We're not going to pretend it didn't happen. I'm not going to gloss over it. And I'm not going to indulge in the assumption that they are pissed at me or that they are like the things that your mind was telling you. It's like, oh, sure, totally available, not helpful. So for me, and so I was like, all right, I want to acknowledge that we're missing this hour. And so we decided as a group what to do about it. It's like, do you guys want to go an extra hour? Or do you want to see what we accomplish in the next, 3 or 4 hours, whatever we had left in that second day there? And we were gonna go long, and then someone's like, I got a babysitter, or I got plans at 6:30 or whatever right after we were done. And it's like, okay, well, there's that. What do y'all feel? Let's decide, let's make a group decision as to how to proceed with what has happened, as opposed to creating separation in a blame scenario, right? Where Riverstone and I are at fault and we owe you something. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to accept what has happened because it's one of our agreements of acceptance. And so let's own our experience, which is another agreement. And if there's something that is problematic going on in your system, we can talk it through. But one way or the other, we're not getting the hour back. So we can add another hour, right? And then we were negotiating and we were finding a place for everyone to feel like they were included, a part of it, and that their desires were being at least acknowledged, if not met. And then once we kind of cleared that, because that's another, some of that subtle sense business, like humor, we could feel it, of course. Like, holy fucking shit, we've been waiting here for an hour after when we were supposed to start meeting. What is going on? Like how all the different things that can go on in the mind of humans who have expectations of something happening in a certain way. And so acknowledging it, feeling that. And then when it felt like it was cleared, and it's like, okay, does this feel clear for everyone? Groovy. All right. And we move on. And I love what you received in that, which is that we walk in with love on our hearts and love in our bodies and elation at being together again. It's like, yes, if we can get to there without ignoring and dismissing and pretending that the feelings of others who are affected by our behaviors don't exist, then we are rolling. And that's been just like part of my journey as a human is feeling the pressure to do it right, succeed, be on time, achieve my goals, do the thing that is called success, or do the thing that validates me in the eyes of the people, whatever that fucking thing is that I imagine it is. That pressure met with, because for me it's like not interested in any of that. I would rather sit still in pure rebellion than follow your dictate, you who are my father or whatever societal piece that I hear from the accomplishers. And so I needed to balance that out so I wasn't just in juvenile rebellion of life and in isolation and avoidance and the like shadow of all that, and many years of heavy drinking alcohol. So like there was lots of opportunities for me to just be like, I'm not willing to participate. And that's an exaggeration of I'm responding to the pressure to perform in a comparative model gone too far. So that has been some of my journey of like balancing. I guess it kind of tracks back to what I said earlier of making a plan and then also being flexible with the plan. Because if I'm just a plan maker, then I'm super rigid and I get really upset when shit goes haywire. But if I'm just a flexible one with no plan, nothing fucking happens. Right. So it's this kind of divine blend of masculine and feminine that we all have within us, and also linear and spatial of the way the brain is designed, and these different balances or harmonies that are important for getting anything to move in a direction that feels like what we're here for.
It's so funny. I think that my inner perfectionist keeps me out of my heart space so much, which my highest ideal would be to live out of my heart. So funny how anti-intuitive that voice really is. How do you turn that voice off inside of yourself?
I love that you brought perfectionist, because it is my recent meditation on perfection is either it is an illusion and doesn't exist, which is speaking to the part of us that wants to be perfect because it's unattainable. And we all ultimately feel that. It's like, I never quite get there, but I get really close. And then I feel a little bit better about not being so imperfect. But we never get there. It never feels what we would call probably perfect. I would probably call it perfect. So I would say it's an illusion and doesn't exist at all. Or everything is perfect. Everything you're doing and exactly how you're doing it is perfect, because it's another way of saying that it is, right? And so for if you are, there is no other path, there's just the path, right? So there's not like, oh, I've fucked up this path so much, let me just hop on a different path. I mean, it just doesn't work that way when we are on Earth in this kind of like 3D reality. So that gets to be a continuous curation of where I want to go next, as opposed to thinking, oh, I've chosen the wrong path, right? That's that comparative piece and that beautiful wisdom of, if you know what the next step is, you're on someone else's path, right? So it's like, it's always unknown what's going to happen next. And that's the whole jam. And so as far as turning off the voice that wants it to be perfect or right, it's like, the question I get to ask myself as often as possible is, compared to what, right? Compared to what? Is it good or bad or worthwhile, or what's the standard that I'm choosing to draw from? And how much relief can I offer myself by removing comparison? Because it's the thief of all joy, some might say. And so the permission to see what it is today, now, even if it's a men's weekend, right? And we've done it a bunch of times, and there's a map and there's a plan, and every single time it's different. And tracking back to life in the theater, like, there's nothing more chaotic and terrifying than getting in front of hundreds of people and living a short glimpse of a life that doesn't even exist. It's like, well, fuck, so many things can go wrong. It's like, right, so make a plan, memorize my lines, rehearse, and then when we get out there, throw it all out the window and live. It's the only way to be like free in it, is to let it be whatever it is that time, which is unlike any other time. And that's the heart versus the head, to me. Is the head wants repetition, wants certainty, wants its risk management oftentimes. So it wants it to be the way that it was planned, and it wants it to be like it was last time. That's how the trap of alcohol can happen too. It's like, oh, I remember it being really fun. Let's try again. It's like, oh, right. It's experientially depressing as fuck sometimes, and really like detracting from my productivity and my heart, my joy can be taken by such a thing. And so that isn't what my mind chooses to remember, because it wants to have the good time. But this can be applied also to allowance and freedom in living life, or holding ceremony, or holding conversation, or allowing each moment to be one of a kind, for it certainly is. It is the only time this happens. This is the only time this conversation will happen. You and I will have other conversations, but it won't be this one. And embracing that, then perfection really gets to be the scene for the silly illusion that it mostly is when we are aiming for it. Because it's like, yeah, well, compared to what? Like, what is this perfect thing? Is it a perfect right angle? Is it a straight line? Is it everyone coming together and feeling so fully connected that they leave and they all change their life so much that it like the world is shifts irrevocably by one weekend that we put together. Sure, that is a sterling example of what is possible in a men's weekend, but that is what I get to pray for, not a gold standard of perfection that I must reach for, because then I'm in my head and I'm how many things will I miss because I'm focused on how many things that I've missed, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're coming across like the lover right now. I'm hearing a lot of that, appreciating the finer details and being present, and definitely you're conveying your heart space very well. Is that something that you have to cultivate, or is it something that's always been there? Or maybe it's Maybelline. I
Maybelline really helps. I
don't.
do. When I feel pretty, my love is bursting forth.
Yeah.
Um, it's a great question, and it's a really sweet question, and I'll be as potent as possible and probably kind of work backwards in time here. Tiffany, my partner, taught me a lot about being loving toward myself, which is really the wellspring for all love on earth. Can't serve from an empty cup. So learning how deep my well of self-hatred and self-disapproval and anger towards self went for a lot of my life was really important to notice and start alchemizing early on. And so then there was also graduate school at NYU, where where Tiff and I both got our masters in fine arts. That was a grand remembering of resensitizing to play and childlike wonder and joy and fun and play. And one can't play if he wants it to be perfect. There's nothing playful about that. And so another shining example of love cultivation that is really bright in my life and must be mentioned around this question is a dear brother, one of my classmates at school, Isaiah Johnson, who lives in Savannah, Georgia, and works at SCAD, the College of Art and Design there. He and I lived on the same block in Brooklyn. We went to grad school together, and I'd been living there for years, and I knew where the delis were and the bodegas and the different restaurants and the places. And I would go with him to these places that I've been going to for years already. And he has a completely different relationship with the people who work there. So he sees the guy sweeping the floor and he's like, "Hey, thank you for doing that. I appreciate it." And then he asks the woman who's behind the counter, who's there every time, "Hey, how you doing today? What's going on? How are you feeling? How are you?" And she laughs and lights up and is genuinely asked by a genuine person how she's doing in a genuine way. And it lands in her heart and it blooms her face like a flower. And so this simple skill of simply inquiring towards someone how they're doing, instead of "here I am for a transaction, I'm going to take the goods that you have to offer and give you money and leave," can turn into a love ceremony. Very simple. Or, "Yeah, I saw your kid running around here the other day. Oh, there he is. Hey, how's it going?" And then we get to have a little moment with her son, who's also there and is being recognized as a human. And so he is where I really learned how to pollinate, which is how I describe it as another brilliant man, Mark, who worked at the deli of a place in Missoula, Montana. Shout out to Mark, many years ago when I was probably like 20, 21, 22, something. And he mentioned that the whole world splits into polluters and pollinators.
Mm.
And the pollinators, you kind of walk on the other side of the street, and then the polluters tend to attract. And also, polluters can also attract, but they attract other polluters because, as people say, misery loves company, or pollution loves pollution. It's like, yeah, there's nothing sweeter in that distorted way than sharing in what's terrible. And so I choose pollination from those two, and that is how the self-love cultivation, which ultimately lands as self-acceptance and freedom to be me for everyone else is taken, as Oscar Wilde reminds us. And that is what, tracking back to earlier in the conversation of you speaking to the feeling that happens in your body when you see me walk into a room. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm so touched by that, because that to me is you giving yourself permission to be you because you see me giving myself permission to be me. And then we get to be each other wholly, completely, and then share what's between, right?
Mhm.
You get to share you with me, and I get to share me with you, and boom, we're rolling. We're in connection already because you are stepping out of, from watching me example it, you're stepping out of your comparative narrative of how you are like someone else, or whether you're measuring up to the room or the space, or being enough of a man, or being heart-led enough, or any of this shit that we can be decided whether we're doing it enough or not. That is the baseline, is this permission to love self in the form of accepting self in the and in the expression of dancing in a way, walking in a way, talking in a way, being in a way that is truly unique, that is a unique expression of that person. And that's like, oh, right, we all get to do that. We are all individual fruits that have peopled out of the earth that is ultimately all one, and be the individual expression for what a fun game to play.
So beautiful. I experience spirit in a lot of different ways, but one of the things that I feel the most is I get chills, or like all my little hair follicles kind of stand up. And you're just talking about the heart and your mentorship and pollinating the earth and all of that. It's just giving me chills in the best way possible. And I hope that's something that we can pollinate together as brothers.
Yeah, always.
Mm.
Always, the more pollination, the broader the spectrum.
So when I'm my higher self,
Mm-hmm.
of course, I'm very loving, caring individual, but oftentimes, especially like at the beginning of events and whatnot, I find myself in one of my shadow characters, Judgy McJudgerson. And
Oh yes, I know that guy.
yeah, it's usually like I'm trying to discern like who's being authentic, who's holding back, etc.
Hmm.
Ultimately, I'm doing this because I've been wounded. Um, I was kicked out of my church at 20 years old, which is a fascinating story. I should get into that sometime. I was also the victim of slander when I was younger. So I've developed these survival mechanisms to try to ensure my safety at all times. And what advice do you give to participants to let go of old survival mechanisms and begin to open their hearts?
Hmm. What a great long range question that is. Yeah, it's a life's pursuit of. Well, let me start here. For me, a quick little nugget when it comes to judging in a space. First of all, it's important to separate in our understanding the difference between the judge and the critic. For the judge and the critic, I see them as sort of like those old guys in the Muppets that sit up in the box seats and they talk shit about everyone and kind of like just sit up in their high seat and decide from there how well it's going, right? So the judge and judgment is a divine piece of how we've kept from being devoured and gone extinct from the beginning of time. So it is a hugely important part of our mechanism to maintaining our apex status as a predator. So the critic, however, loves to use the and of course the judge has a shadow and a lightness, right? There's using judgment of a situation versus using it to be a reason to not shift or change. And the critic, I deeply associate with my mind. So I love that we're talking about kind of mind versus heart, which is also, of course, one thing, the mind body. But while it can feel separate, it can be fun to talk about. So the mind or the brain, the thinking mind, the conscious mind loves to seek evidence of how other people are blowing it so that I can feel like I'm not blowing it, is usually how it shows up for me. And so, the first question I have, the first nugget question I have for that is, what possible business is it of yours if someone else is being authentic, telling the truth, or anything else, right?
Mhm.
It's not for you to decide or have anything to do with, because it isn't you that is expressing, it's someone else, right? However, Then, if we're in a ceremonial space like a men's weekend with Sacred Sons or with Brotherhood of Cascadia, then, or just a men's council where there are agreements, then we can lean on the agreements for what the impact of that may be, right? If someone is being inauthentic, or if you know that I am being untruthful about something, and we are in a space to be where we've committed a confidential space where we get to be honest with self and other, then you can take ownership of your experience, another agreement, and you can first accept me for who I am and how I am, which is another agreement. And then if it happens to elicit a charge in your system, you can take ownership of that charge and that upset and bring it into the space. So we have some material to play with, bring some clay to the pottery wheel. So, and then do that in the most sacred way possible, which is the whole of our agreements. So, separating the self-appointed position as decider if everyone is doing it right or not. That is the first key to the door to free yourself of the prison of Judge and McJudgerson. And if then you can, so I feel like it's an invitation for personal investigation, something like that, judgment. It's like, okay, why is judgment up right now? Why am I so fixated on this person that is just feels like they're full of shit, they're lying, they're so expressive, it's really annoying. I get that sometimes. This one guy, he'd been to like 3 events and finally comes and he's like, all right, I got to say something. It's like, when I got here and I saw you, I was like, oh God, not this fucking guy again. It's like, he's like, the last 2 events, I was like, this dude is so full of shit. And then as he got to, and as soon as he said it, I was like, oh yeah, yep, totally got it. Totally. I know exactly what you are saying. I hear you. It can be a lot to see how I express and trust that it could possibly be real and genuine and not a show. And it also is a show because I'm having a great time. And so, but the authenticity that you speak of, that for me personally is like my number one offering. And so if, so let's see here, tracking back to the initial question of how to, it's when it comes up, it can serve as an invitation for personal, individual, internal alchemy, which then can become alchemy of the collective. So you are being beckoned by your thinking mind showing up as your critic and or your judge, being like, hey, this dude's full of shit, which may be true, right? It's a protective mechanism. It's a survival mechanism that you develop from the things that you mentioned, right? It's like, I ultimately at the base of your experience, it's like, I don't want to get kicked out of the group because I'll starve and die, right? Like it's as old as time. And so there's something in that, which is like, yeah, okay. And so I'm not going to let that happen again, which is already hilarious because it can't happen again. It only gets to happen the one time, tracking back to the perfection piece. But there is the course correction that can happen in there. It's like, okay, why is this up for me? What is it about this? And I get to investigate. And then if it becomes something that feels like it is getting in the way of that man's expression, then we can bring it into the circle. That's what's so beautiful about being in a ceremonial and sacred way with each other, is just like, listen, if it's about the container and not about me and my own insecurity, then I want to bring it. And even if it is about me and my insecurity, if I bring it in a way of ownership, like that's so much about a charge clearing is like, you know what? I just own that I think you're full of shit and it's based on this and this and this. And I just want to like clear that so that I can actually have my heart open and be present for what you're sharing, because I'm sitting here judging you because I think you're full of shit. Right. And so all of it is invitation, and I can maybe do that on my own. You and I can do that in conversation, or we can do it in a group setting, something like a charge clearing. And so there are various ways to respond to the mechanism of what you're naming here of judgment showing up, Judge and McJudgerson showing up, and then what I like to call shatter and sift is something how I kind of like treat, or like a visual that helps with survival mechanisms, is you built it for a reason, right? Any survival mechanism is built for a reason, for fucking survival. Like there was a time when you're like, I'm going to die energetically, emotionally, or literally if I don't sort this out. Got kicked out of the church, right? It's like, well, shit, I gotta like make sure that I don't ever believe in something that much again, so I can't get the rug pulled out like that again, right? Mm-hmm. So that involves some discernment. That involves some being really present with being willing to love and care, and that's what is so intense sometimes of when I talk with men and women who are in recovery from organized religion, is it is that like base thing, that belief in divinity that we all feel in our bodies and bones is turned into a marketing plan, and it's outside of us all of a sudden, and then it can be taken away, and it's like, what the fuck, what is this? So getting off on a bit of a tangent, but the shatter and sift opportunity is breaking apart the mechanism that you've built, which can take time in and of itself because you've probably built it well because you wanted to survive, right? And so it's well built, it's sturdy, and so finding the bits and pieces of it that are like the gold or the nuggets or the little gemstones that I want to sift out of all of that rubble, that's what it was based on. Like the judge and discernment, which is kind of like the light aspect of the judge.
Mm-hmm.
And then the critic kind of embodies the shadow aspect of the judge, is one way I could describe that in my experience. And so that discernment is a beautiful piece of the survival mechanism that gets to be reintegrated into the navigational system without the distrust and the heartbreak and the perceived disorientation and betrayal are all some words that I could guess are wrapped up in feeling like you were kicked out of your church after 20 years, right? All of those pieces get to be alchemized and let go of because that isn't now, that was then, right? You were preparing for that thing that happened before to not happen again, but that it can only prepare you so much for what's coming because it isn't ever going to happen again that way. Right. So then it's like breaking apart, shattering apart these calluses and these mechanisms that were built for that, and then sifting through for the gemstones of what get to be reintegrated into the system. If that makes any sense.
Makes 100% sense. Yeah, this is a great conversation. I love hearing about your own alchemy journey, and one of the things that's unique about the work is I don't think the work is ever really going to be done, at least not this lifetime or on Earth. I feel like we've always got a new level that we can expand to. Where are you at right now with your heart journey? Is there something you'd like to share with us with what you're trying to do to keep that heart open and maybe even expand it further?
It's a great question, and it's a touching one to kind of play with in this moment. I have a lot of appreciation for my partner right now because she is the one who's around when I come home to recharge. And sometimes for me, recharging looks like sometimes my light can get really dim, and I can get really, I'm capable of rage and intensity and depression and all these pieces that are, I've never enjoyed being around them, being in them. And I know that it's not fun for her to be around them either. And so that is something that has been, I have just a little like whiff of Asperger's or autism that I get through my paternal line, and I'm dealing with how my brain functions with certain things being certain ways, and it just feels like the way that it goes, and then there's another person that feels it goes a different way, and it's like my brain lock. And so that being open and compassionate and caring and sweet when I'm experiencing intense frustration and constriction around my heart, around the totally like maniacal histrionics that can come up through that, feeling like I'm being made fun of or made a fool of, like all of these things that come up around being the youngest child, probably of like the last one to know what's going on, and who knows what all it touches. But it's been a lot of opportunities for me to really look at my willingness to be compassionate and accepting to this amazing person that is just so willing to contribute to our home and to me and my growth and to her and her growth. And it is, oh, my spirit is divided at times, and it is so disorienting to feel myself kind of become this other person that is really inflexible and defensive and frustrated and contracted. And it's just like, wow, yeah, no, I really get the opportunity to practice what I preach in those moments and, listen, hear things like, I am always in command of my mind and body. I get to choose my reality at all times. Every new breath is a new life, and I can start in a new way at any moment. And it's like, yeah, but not this fucking moment. It's terrible right now. And it's like, oh shit, this is the time. This is the time. And so, fuck, man. Here's what I'll say. I've noticed an incredible amount of progress in all of this, and I'm happy to celebrate it. And it feels really good to note the progress. And that's what comes up as my deepest practice right now is keeping open when it feels like rage is happening to me, and believing that it's something that I am creating and can shift. That shit feels like the key to the kingdom to me right now.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that little piece of vulnerability. I definitely I get so much out of it when the leaders are able to humanize themselves, and it helps me so much to know that I'm not the only one that struggles with rage, or I'm not the only one that struggles with depression, and to know that other folks are out there uh, fighting the same fight, and they found ways that help. It's very encouraging.
Yeah, man. Vulnerability begets vulnerability, and it's the only way, in my experience, of like getting it actually. I mean, it can be totally self-serving as well, right? Because it's like if I'm strong enough to be vulnerable about what's really going on, then I have geniuses like you and all the other men and women that I hang out with. I'm like, oh, I do this sometimes for that. It's like, and not that I'm always seeking strategy, but sometimes it's really nice to feel the commonality and the common thread, and also to then sometimes some strategy around it. It's like, oh yeah, that sometimes can be helped by this. And it's like, oh, that's really simple. I already do that. I'll do it more.
So, is having a daily cacao ritual, is that also a piece of your heart opening practice?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Thank you for tracking it to that. It is it's hard to track how much having cacao in my life has warmed and smoothed and softened my experience and made available my bright light that has always wanted to be there. As you were asking earlier about if it's always been there or not, it's like, yeah, I think it always has been.
Hmm.
But there's been things that I've physically built on top of it with muscle, or I've drunk it down with alcohol, or I've connected with that in an incomplete way through sex with people I don't know, or whatever the thing is that is just like the access point to what feels like the light. Cacao has been an access point to consistency of keeping the light. I'm seeing like a flame in a lantern. Like it doesn't get crazy bright like it used to with alcohol, and it doesn't get crazy dark and dim like it used to with kind of between. It's all tracks back to the alcohol, but um, the depression would come on super strong, and it still does sometimes. I definitely can find myself depleted and just unwilling and humorless. I feel really humorless and hopeless sometimes when that depression comes in. So it's hard to measure and track how many jagged, hardened conversations might have happened had I not found Cacao and she found me, and that ancient medicine of the heart in the jungle
Mm.
being it's a cup of love. It is love, and it's in the indefinable thing that love is. It's like it's really hard, like fire or like play or humor. These kind of like misty, mystical things that are a little hard to put into words. We can learn and teach ourselves how to put them through a funnel and play with them and like have them in a space, and we know when they're around, but we can't necessarily tell you what they are. right? I don't know what love is, but I know when it's around. And the closest I can do to physicalizing it is probably in a cup of cacao. It's a cup of love. And then once that cup fills your internal cup and you start feeling what that cup must have been feeling, then we're in that love vibration. And it's like, oh, so much more can happen from this baseline in this environment, this atmosphere, than a more constricted, more contracted, busier, work focused, faster atmosphere.
Yeah.
So yeah, she helps a lot.
So if somebody wants to connect with you and get some cacao, or maybe they want to talk to you and Tiffany about relating or one of the many offerings that you two share together, what would be a good way to reach out to you?
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. Instagram is a pretty good way to find me. It's Bryce _Gill, BryceGill, and also our website, which is under a bit of construction right now, and not the most effective, but at least you can get a feel for who we are and what we do. It's aspengrove.love. We live in Portland, Oregon, so cacao is always most affordable when picked up in person, and then we get to share a hug. And so I always have lots and lots of it in our basement, and I can also ship cacao. It is by the pound and delicious. A pound usually lasts about a month with a near daily practice. So as a gauge, if you're wanting to get like 100 pounds instead of 1 pound, somewhere in the middle. But yeah, you can find me in those two avenues. It's probably the best.
Great. Yeah. And you're also hosting a men's group every other Tuesday. Is that correct? Or is that somebody else hosting?
Yeah,
Okay.
that is correct. Yeah. So this Tuesday, the 6th, is going to be our council, New Culture Council. And there is every 2 weeks we have that. And sometimes I post it on Instagram. I usually just post it to the little chat feeds that I have. But if there's a man in the Portland area who wants to be a part of that, it's an open council, and so I'd love to have you. I'd love to hear from you before you just show up. But if you just show up and have goodness in your heart and some willingness to share, then you're welcome as well.
Great. Well, I'll be sure and include those links in the show notes. And as always, brother, it's been great to get to pick your brain a little bit. I'd like to thank Bryce for coming on today. I'd like to thank our partner, Brotherhood of Cascadia. And I'd like to thank all of you for listening. Next, we have Vince Matoska-Chafin, a co-founder of Sacred Sons, coming on to discuss Convergence 9, the first ever Sacred Sons event where women and men are doing the work together. Good night, and we'll see you next time.